If you're of a certain age, Pete's Wicked Ale brings back fond memories of the early days of craft beer. I'll dive into the meteoric rise and fall of one of the first superstar craft brands of the 80s and 90s. This is Beer in Front, part of the Beer Media Group. Every week I'll talk to people in and around the beer world and get their stories all about beer. That's Beer in Front, and it's coming up now. Welcome to episode 278 of Beer in Front. Thank you very much for listening. I'm your host, Dave Zalatoris, and Beer in Front is a charter member of the Beer Media Group. In the mid-90s, as craft beer was gaining national popularity, you had beers like Red Hook ESB, Anchor Steam, Celis White, Dixie Black and Voodoo. They became widely available even in grocery stores when, just a few years earlier, your options beyond mainstream beers were rare. Today I'm going to talk about one of those early craft beer pioneers, Pete's Wicked Ale. I'll have all that plus the news of the week and a review of the FOBAB Festival. That's coming up on this week's Beer in Front. The Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beers was this weekend in Chicago, and let me tell you, that was outstanding. Phenomenal festival, one of my favorite festivals of the year, if not the favorite. Such a great time. Really cool. I met up with Danny from Hip Hops in the Liquid Liner Notes podcast. We wound up taking the L down together. Met my friend Ben down there, so it was cool hanging out with old friends, new friends, and trying some just phenomenal beers. There were so many. I mean, I can't list them all here, but there were some definite highlights for me. Old Irving. Man, did they knock it out of the park. And I was really glad that at the time I had it, Trevor Rose Hamblin from Old Irving was standing right there. And I was like, dude, this is absolutely phenomenal. Some other ones that I really liked. I'm talking about it later on in the show from Cerveza Seven Vidas. This is a place in Peru that my wife brought me a couple beers from them. They were there, so I had to try it. That was phenomenal as well. Firestone Walker. You know, they had a couple entries there, and it was really good. I wanted to try them because they're always kind enough to me, sending me stuff for the podcast. But they had one that I had to go back a couple times and get. They had Uber Omni Gruber. This is in the specialty strong porter and stout category. This was absolutely phenomenal. Some other ones that I really enjoyed. Revolution's 15-year beer, that took home some hardware. That's an absolute phenomenal beer. If you've listened to the show before, and if you haven't, why haven't you? There's 5 years worth of shit. Go back and listen to. But one of the beers that I've talked about a lot, and I haven't had it in ages, from Pipeworks, their Imperial End of Days. That's on my Mount Rushmore of beers. That's such a phenomenal beer. I remember having it at Beer Under Glass like 9 years ago. I've only seen it once since then, and that wasn't that long afterwards. As we're getting ready to leave, we walked by. There it was. So we had to go back a couple of times and get that. I think it's out in cans again. So if it's out in cans from Pipeworks, I'll definitely buy it and have it on the show at a later time. But that was such a thrill to get that and try that again. And it was just as good, you know, in 2025 as it was when I first had it in 2016. My buddy Ben, we were at Beer Under Glass back then, and we both agreed this is still just one of the best beers I've ever had. So if you see that from Pipeworks, once again, it's called Imperial End of Days, you got to grab that. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones, like Goose Island. If you go outside of FOBAB, they had a little area. They had the train car there. They were pouring some variants that were really good. Try to go over the brewer's list because you like making notes, but after a couple barrel-aged beers, you stop taking notes. I mean, they were all really good. But some other ones that I liked one I had from Nick and Ivy. Moore always puts out some great stuff. Lunar Brewing, I was a big fan of the one that I had from them. I think I had one from Ike and Oak that I liked. Haymarket, who was on the show not that long ago, they did their raspberry, and they were right next to the entrance. So that was what I kicked it off with, the Haymarket Raspberry. I forget what they named it. It used to be called Claire's Thirsty Ale, I believe, but that was just as good. Changed the name, but the beer was still phenomenal. Great time. Went to the Brewers Lounge there. The food was fantastic. The barbecue was absolutely killer there. So I can't thank the Illinois Craft Brewers Guild enough. It was such a great time. The beers were great. The people were great. Everything was fantastic about FOBAB. If you haven't gone, well, it's too late now, but you definitely got to make plans to come out next year for 2026 because FOBAB is such a phenomenal festival. I'd like to thank the people that support the show over on Patreon. That means a lot. It helps the show out. If you'd like to support the show, you can head over to patreon.com/beerinfront. Also, if you have any ideas or suggestions for the show, please feel free to email me, dave@beerinfront.com. In beer and beverage news, George Clooney and his founders of Casamigos, which is a great tequila, they're now joining the list of celebrity non-alcoholic beer makers. They're going to come up with a new NA beer line. You know, what, Charlie Sheen has one, Tom Holland, John Mulaney has one now. So you could add George Clooney to the list of celebrities that are coming up with a non-alcoholic beer. Flying Dog Brewery, they're coming out with the Holiday Survival Pack. This is going to be a 12-pack of beers that will help you through the holidays. They're going to have Passive-Aggressive Pills, Awkward Silence Black Lager. Why Are They Here? This is an Imperial Red IPA and a hazy IPA called Tension Tamer. So if you're around where Flying Dog distributes, you could pick one of those up to get ready for the holiday gatherings. Back to non-alcoholic stuff, Heineken, they're going to expand their non-alcoholic line with a couple new ones. Now, they're going to have, in their 0.0 line, they're going to have a cold-pressed lime and a nectarine juniper. That's going to be coming out in 2026, so look for that from Heineken. Here in Chicago, Hop Butcher for the World and Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins and his Madame Zuzu's, they're coming out with a Smashing Pumpkins beer called Twilight the Starlight. That's going to be available this week. They're having a big thing over at Hop Butcher for their 3rd anniversary of opening up the Lincoln Avenue tap room. So that's going to be all this week over at Hop Butcher, but I believe it's coming out Wednesday. This new one, it's a collaboration with Hop Butcher, Billy Corgan, and Madame Zuzu's. The artwork is really cool. They're celebrating the 30th anniversary of Melancholy in the Infinite Sadness. I'm off early this week, so I'll definitely be heading to Hop Butcher to pick that up. Voodoo Ranger is not slowing down. They're coming out with a couple new products for next year. They're going to have Sweet Ride. This is going to be a 6.5% IPA. It's going to be more in the grocery store channel. And they're coming out with G-Force. This is an 11% IPA. It's going to be in those stovepipe cans for the convenience market. So if you're a fan of Voodoo Ranger, look for that coming out next year. Allagash, they're trying something new. They're going to come out with, they call it a maple wine cocktail, something to be served over ice. This is going to be called Great Woods. It's a maple wine cocktail. Now, this looks pretty interesting. It's 14% alcohol, and they're going to have it in smaller 375 milliliter bottles. No release date coming out with that, but looks interesting. And you got to, it's Allagash, so you're going to have to give it a try. They call it a maple wine cocktail. You pour it over ice, add a twist of orange peel. Check that out coming up hopefully soon from Allagash. Back to New Belgium. Now they're going to come out with their parent company's going to come out with some ready to drink cocktails. They're going to take Oberon Light. That's going to be year round, but you could look for it's a vodka cocktail. It's going to be called Vandal. Now the labeling on that kind of goes towards their Voodoo Ranger character. That's going to be a vodka cocktail. And also Kirin, now they're all part of the same family. They're going to have, it's like a vodka soda. There's a pineapple one. It's called, and I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce it, Hyokitsu. They're going to do a pineapple one. They're going to have a strawberry one. It's going to be in a couple test markets, and if those go well, that's going to be released nationally. Same thing with that Vandal. They're going to have a few test markets. If it goes well, yeah, you'll see more of it. And like I said, that they're also going to have their Oberon Light. That's going to be year-round. They also make, and I have not seen it in Chicago, but maybe I just haven't been looking for it. I did not know in New Belgium's going to be pushing this harder. They have a product called Light Strike. It's a hard seltzer, but it's in like a Gatorade type bottle. So it's 5%, it's non-carbonated, and I guess this is, I don't know if there's electrolytes in this or whatever, but that's what the packaging kind of looks like. So I don't really know much about it, but if you see Light Strike, if you like, what you have from New Belgium, you might want to give that a try. But they have an orange mango and a lemon lime flavor of this. Last week on the show, I was talking about THC beverages. Well, now the Beer Institute, along with some other trade associations, they're calling Congress and attorney generals to ban the sale of intoxicating hemp products. So I guess they want them removed until there's new laws and federal laws established. Personally, I don't know. I think if you ban something, the demand and, stuff on the black market's going to take over. So I don't know. Hopefully cooler heads prevail and we could get a resolution to all this to make everyone happy. As I mentioned in the intro, I'm going to take a dive into a craft beer that's no longer with us. Pete's Wicked Ale was huge back in the day. I remember I even had a Pete's Wicked Ale varsity jacket that no longer fits, but I wish I still had that. That was a great jacket. But Pete's Wicked Ale was everywhere in the late 80s, early 90s, and I want to do more of these. I'm going to talk about other beers that are no longer with us. So please, if you have any ideas or forgotten beers that you want me to take a deeper dive into, by all means, let me know because I'd love to hear about it. But let's get on with Pete's Wicked Ale. Pete Schlossberg. Now he was Pete. Now his journey began in the late 70s in California. He was originally interested in making wine, but he found that takes too long. So he shifted to home brewing, which ferments in weeks instead of years. Now, like most home brewers, he started in his kitchen with a 5-gallon bucket, a big brew kettle, and a garbage can for equipment. He experimented through, like 6-7 years before he settled on a recipe that he felt worthy of commercial production. This was a brown ale. And if you remember the early days of craft beer, there were a lot of brown ales that are out there, and it's still a great beer. Now, in 1986, Schlossberg founded Pete's Brewing Company with a partner, and he did some contract brewing with a brewery called the Palo Alto Brewing Company to produce this. The first commercial batch came out in December of '86, and it sold out quickly. If you remember the early labels, it featured his dog on there. It was like a bull terrier, almost kind of looked like, if you remember, Spuds McKenzie, but that's what it looked like. It was a pretty basic label on that, but it took off. In the late '80s and early '90s, Pete's Wicked Ale really soared in popularity amongst the growing craft beer scene in the US. By 1989, it was available in 8 states, and by the early '90s, it was up to 47 states. Palo Alto, the brewing company, they went bankrupt in '87, so Pete shifted production over to August Shell in Minnesota. Sales continued to accelerate. By 1993, the company was one of the fastest growing private companies in the U.S., with sales in the millions of dollars. In 1994, Pete's Wicked Ale had a national television campaign featuring Pete himself, one of the first times that a craft brewer ran a major TV advertising campaign. At its peak, Pete's Brewing Company was the second largest specialty brewer in the U.S., behind only the makers of Sam Adams, the Boston Beer Company. Once Pete's Wicked Ale became established, the company kind of diversified its product line, and the Wicked line included, Pete's Wicked Lager, a Wicked Red that I remember drinking a lot of, a Honey Wheat. It also had like a summer brew and a winter brew. And in 1995, the company went public, had an IPO, and he wanted to expand into more markets, international markets, and so forth. Also in the mid-90s, the company had its production contract moved to a larger facility in a partnership with Stroh's Brewing in St. Paul to meet the increased demand. 1994 sales reached 31 million, and growth rates soared, some years even doubling in sale. But with size comes challenges. The craft beer market began to change. One, there was more competition. You had consumer tastes that were shifting towards your pale and IPAs versus your maltier browns, and the logistics of scaling and everything like that. In 1998, Pete's Brewing Company was acquired by the Gambrinus Company for about $69 million in cash. Under the new ownership of Gambrinus, the brand was shifting away from its craft beer roots, and then by 2011, Gambrinus officially discontinued the Pete's Wicked Ale brand. They cited rapidly decreasing sales volume. You couldn't get anything of Pete's. You just had clowns like me in a varsity jacket and find an old swag on eBay, places like that. But in 2016, Hop and Frog, they brought back a version of Pete's Wicked Ale. It was a limited release. It was called Wicked Repeat 2X, and it was an imperial version, and it was brewed with Pete himself. So that was really good. I remember in the early days of doing this podcast, it was like 2020, I picked up, I think it was a triple version of this from Hop and Frog, and I thought it was really good. I haven't seen anything out there in the 5 years, but that was really nice for fans like myself of Pete's Wicked who still remember it fondly and wanted to try it. You could have these imperial versions from Hop and Frog and Pete Schlossberg himself. Pete's Wicked Ale, it played a key role in the early United States craft beer movement. It helped to bring these specialty beers into the awareness of the mainstream. It had success, and it illustrated how a home brewer, a hobbyist, could scale this to a national brand. And we've seen over the last, 15, 20 years, a lot more people who got their start as home brewers followed Pete's lead and became extremely successful. Pete's Wicked is a what was story. It was dominant. Now it's largely just a memory, a footnote, but it was historically important in the annals of craft beer. All right, the beer that's in front of me. Normally I talk about like beers from Illinois. This one's from Peru. This is from Cerveza Seven Vidas. Now, they're a Peruvian beer company. My wife, when she went to Peru, brought me a couple of their beers. And then lo and behold, at FOBAB, they were there pouring a couple different. I had one of them there. It was outstanding. And I wish I would have been able to talk to the people there. I saw one guy with the brewery shirt on, but like he just like walked by in a hurry. But I would have liked to talk to him real quick. But I'm going to have this pale ale here. This is 5.3%. Let's crack it open. Their pale ale pours a nice color, little murky, not crystal clear. I get a lot of hops out of that, a nice hop aroma. Yeah, no, it smells really good. I like the aroma on this. It's really good. I like the flavor. You definitely get the hops there. I pick up some malt out of this. I think this is a really solid pale ale. Oh, that's excellent. If I was in Peru, I would be drinking this all the time. Now, she also brought a double IPA from them. I'm going to do that on video maybe in the next week or so. But if you're ever in Peru, and I don't know if they're in Lima, she said, I don't know if it was like Machu Picchu, but if you were ever in Peru and you see something from Cerveza Seven Vidas, I would definitely put this one in the cart. I think this pale ale is outstanding. Thank you to Ruby. All right, that's going to wrap things up for this edition of Beer in Front. I thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed the little going back in the Wayback Machine to talk about Pete's Wicked Ale. I'm planning on maybe doing some other beers that are no longer with us that were pretty popular back in the day. So if you have any ideas about that, please let me know. I'd love to find out more about that beer and talk about it. Have a great week. I'll talk to you next week. And remember, sometimes the beer in front of you is the best one yet.